episode 55 of the Real World Paleo Podcast. Hi everyone, I'm Christine Lehman, a certified nutritional therapist and the reverse diabetes coach, which is also the name of my website. I help clients reverse diabetes naturally, lose weight, and lower their cholesterol. I also see clients by Skype. The Real World Paleo Podcast is now available on iHeartRadio, as well as iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play. You can also buy some great paleo and primal products from skincare to grass-fed meat on my podcast page at reversediabetescoach.com. Please remember while you're listening to the show, advice and information we provide is intended to be helpful and informative, but is not a substitute for medical advice or treatment. I had planned to interview nutrition consultant Caitlin Weeks and her husband, Chef Nabil Boumrar, on the podcast today. They co-authored the cookbook Mediterranean Paleo Cooking, which we'll be talking about anyway today. But unfortunately, the interview fell through, but I didn't want to waste all this great mouth-watering information since I have the cookbook also, and have made several recipes from it already. So I will share what I know with you today as well as read from the cookbook. To give you the backstory on Caitlin and Nabil, Caitlin is a native of Nashville, Tennessee, and has lived in the San Francisco Bay Area for several years. She is a certified personal trainer and then completed a rigorous 2-year nutrition program at Bauman College and became a nutrition consultant in 2010. She is the author of the popular blog Grass-Fed Girl, which you might have heard of. Nabil grew up in Algiers, Algeria, in North Africa along the Mediterranean Sea. He moved to San Francisco in 2004 and worked in the restaurant business for a while before enrolling and graduating from the culinary school at San Francisco City College in 2010. He has been working full-time as a chef at the Omni Hotel in downtown San Francisco. Now, just to recap, the paleo diet, which is definitely incorporated into this cookbook, is dairy-free, and there are a few exceptions such as feta cheese and yogurt, but they're optional in the cookbook. And as you may remember, paleo is grain-free, so the cookbook makes swaps for these items that I think work well, and we'll talk about some of them during the podcast today. So I also want to give a shout out to Diane Sanfilippo because she played an important role in moving this from an ebook to this beautiful cookbook with photographs that remind me of the Mediterranean colors, which is sort of this green-blue, beautiful color. And I featured Diane in a previous episode where we did talk about her food photography, especially in this cookbook. And that is in episode 37 if you want to go listen to that. I also want to mention that one reason I was excited about this Mediterranean paleo cooking is because I grew up along the Mediterranean. My dad was in the Foreign Service, and I lived in Tunisia, which is next door to Algeria. It's to the east of it, for 5 years as a child, and I lived specifically in Carthage. And I had a beautiful home that was just 2 houses from the Mediterranean Sea. So I was very spoiled in that the Mediterranean was my backyard. And there's some dishes that I grew up with that are featured in this Mediterranean Paleo Cookbook. So I was really excited to see some dishes that I could make that were from my childhood. So one of them is chakchouka, and it can be spelled in different ways, with a CH or an SH, but that traditionally is a dish with tomatoes and green peppers kind of as a base, and then eggs, which kind of end up turning into fried eggs pretty much as you cook through the dish in a skillet. An interesting twist on this is that Nabil, who I mentioned is a chef, has added meatballs to it. So it really becomes a heartier dish, and also great protein. And so I had been wanting to make shakshuka, and when the sort of paleo version came out, I was really excited. So I made it in this huge iron skillet that I have. Absolutely delicious, and it worked so well that I have 5 meals out of it. And then I was able not only to eat it for breakfast, but it works well for dinner, again, because it has the meatballs in it. So it was absolutely delicious, and I would never hesitate to serve it up for guests as well. He also has some other dishes that I had in Tunisia, such as a lamb couscous. And couscous, as you may know, is made from a semolina grain. So in the paleo world, we don't eat grains. So the swap for that is to use cauliflower, similar to, if you're all familiar with cauli rice or faux cauli potatoes. It's the same thing. You're basically putting chopped up cauliflower in a food processor, and then you can add a little basil or cilantro and drizzle olive oil in to make it a creamier consistency. So that's a swap for couscous and some other dishes or items in the cookbook, which I'll talk about in a minute. So also the food photography, as I mentioned, are really rich colors, and it was done to remind people, I think, of North Africa. But I want to say the Mediterranean, if you want to get out your map, this is a good time, really borders on much more than North Africa. So we're talking here, first of all, the North Africa region is also called the Maghreb, and it was Morocco and Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya. And these countries were also occupied by the French. So when I was growing up in Carthage, French became my second language. I learned it as a child, and I think that was good because I'm very comfortable with it. And it's still the business language today, and it's used in universities. So most educated Tunisians and North Africans do know French. And also that region shares, this common foods, but they'll have their own little individual twist on it. So, and also the Middle East is different. I learned that the dialect I learned in North Africa, and I'm, believe me, not fluent in Arabic, but I did learn some phrases, is different than the Arabic spoken in the Middle East. So, but going back to the Mediterranean, it's this large swath that encompasses the Middle East, Southern Europe, certainly Spain and Italy, and France, southern France, as well as the Balkan countries. And so there are some unique regional differences as well. So I'm just going to pick up the cookbook here and share some of that with you. So one of the reasons there are some regional differences is there were many invasions. Different peoples, as you might imagine, was a great trading area. Different peoples were conquering it. And so many distinct cultures from Spain to Arabia. And then most recently France, as I mentioned, which colonized Algeria. They all left their mark on the cuisine. And so some of their distinct flavors and spices, such as saffron and ginger and cinnamon. And then there's also these, because if you think about the sea, of course there's seafood. So then we have sardines and shellfish, and then olive oil and almonds are all popular ingredients in that part of the world. Now another thing I thought was interesting is Nabil's family is actually called Berber, B-E-R-B-E-R, and that's a distinct tribal people who are nomadic historically. They settled in the mountains of Algeria and Morocco, and there's still some Berbers actually in Tunisia. And some claim that the Berbers are descended from the Vikings. And I always joke, I'm half Norwegian, so I always joke the Vikings got around, and I think most people would agree with that. But when they traced the DNA of the Berbers, they found that they had some common DNA with the Sami people, who are nomadic reindeer herders up in, they call it Lapland, the northernmost part of Scandinavia, which crosses like Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, and Finland. And so I thought that made sense to me because the Berbers were also nomadic people. So, who knows for sure, but it's just kind of, if they don't, genetically, they're not Arab. So that I thought was really interesting as well. And it also makes sense they would like the water. So the Mediterranean cuisine it's very diverse, of course, as you might imagine, when you have all these different countries. So one of the Middle Eastern ingredients in that part of the Middle Eastern side of it is tahini, which is made from a sesame paste, and that has that unique tangy flavor and silky texture. And then in Italy, of course, more dishes are tomato-based, and oregano, olive oil, parsley, basil, and thyme are prominent. You'll see more Asian influences in Moroccan food with the use of turmeric and ginger. The Balkans are known for their use of paprika and capers. Provence, a coastal region of France, is well known for its Mediterranean flavors such as pungent sage and rosemary, as well as licorice-flavored fennel, which is delicious if you've ever had it. So there are all these different nuances. The dish I mentioned, chakchouka, has sometimes been dubbed eggs in purgatory. So I think Nom Nom, the book Paleo Nom Nom Cookbook, has also, she has a recipe for eggs in purgatory there. So it's interesting how that one dish has regional variations as well as kind of made its way over here in that with that title. And also some people have changed the recipe and added potatoes or artichokes. So all different kinds of variations on it. So another thing I thought was interesting is that about Mediterranean cuisine is that it also relies heavily on local and seasonal ingredients, from produce and herbs to grazing animals and wild seafood. So it fits well with the whole paleo frame because it's grass-fed, often very fresh seasonal produce and seafood. So again, warm spices and fresh herbs like cilantro, parsley, and mint. And then you have olives and olive oil. It's really abundant throughout the Mediterranean. And used for these tajines, which I'll explain what kind of cooking that is, salads, soups, and dips. And then you have these salty anchovies, sardines, and other fatty fish, which are popular in many seaside towns and villages. So there are some unique things, and I think, if you've been to a Mediterranean restaurant, which most of us have, I think, you will appreciate some of the spices and the flavors and ingredients that we'll be talking about that are in this cookbook, as well as, the paleo version of them and the swaps. So to make it more paleo friendly, which is, of course, good for people with any kind of gluten allergy or sensitivity, and also for autoimmune issues, and frankly for people even with diabetes who have low-grade inflammation and so on. So I wanted just to go ahead then and talk about some of these swaps. So cauliflower, as I mentioned earlier, is used for the couscous, which is a popular side dish, especially in North Africa. That is typical with lamb. You're going to, like a lamb stew, you would have a couscous along with it. And that's pretty popular or common to find in stores these days. But again, cauliflower works well. I noticed that Nabil likes cauliflower, and there's several recipes that he uses cauliflower. There's a cauliflower and cumin soup, which is a good combination. Cumin is another spice that's very popular, which I like too. There's also, I've made that recipe's on my website under recipes. And then there's cumin and cauliflower frittata, which is great. And just to refresh, frittata is where you keep the omelet in the skillet and then you put it in the oven for like 5 to 10 minutes. So it just makes it, you're basically kind of baking it. And it just gels, I think, even more, so to speak. It firms up more. Cauliflower also replaces garbanzo beans. If most of us have had hummus. So it works well as a replacement for those in hummus. There's a good hummus recipe. They're all the same recipes you would expect from a Mediterranean cookbook. Falafel as well. That's what you replace the garbanzo beans with. The only thing is when I made the falafel, mine ended up being a bit more crumbly than I would have liked. So if any of you figure out the secret to making the ball stick, let me know. There's also a recipe for tahini dipping sauce, and tahini uses, a sesame seed paste. That's kind of the base for it. So another interesting ingredient in some of these recipes, especially for sweets, and there's absolutely fantastic dessert section in this cookbook, but rose water is something that is used also in smoothies, and this recipe that I've made for a breakfast called strawberry coffee cake, and it's unique to North Africa and the Middle East. And to explain what rose water is, it's a steamed distillation of rose petals, and I'm quoting the book, that smells heavenly and tastes great. Now, I have an essential oil with rose water, so I'm tempted. I would like to just try that out as a, in place of that. But there's also orange zest and lemon zest that you can replace the rose water with, because that was not something I immediately thought, oh, I have this in my pantry. Now, if you have access to a Middle Eastern food store, you could easily get it there. It does kind of enhance the flavor, so it may be worth trying. You can also order from Amazon online. Now, and then there's another similar to rose water, but it's orange blossom water. And that is also, as you might imagine, it's a steam distillation of Seville orange blossoms, which just sounds heavenly to me. And so you would be able to find the orange blossom water as well at a Middle Eastern food store or on Amazon.com. But again, the easiest thing is to use orange or lemon zest in recipes, which I've done so far, even though I think I'm going to try the rose water, and I've been very happy with. So the that strawberry coffee cake that I mentioned, that's what I did. I used, I believe, lemon zest in there, and then I've used orange zest. I made the pomegranate blueberry smoothie. I just posted that on my website, and that was absolutely delicious. And I used orange zest, just a little grated orange zest in there as a replacement for the orange blossom or the rose water. So really happy with every recipe that I've made so far. So as I was mentioning, cumin is a popular Mediterranean spice, along with mint, paprika, cinnamon, and then there's this spice blend called Ras El Hanout. And I want to just explain briefly what that is. So bear with me, I'm flipping around here in the cookbook. And that is a mix of spices commonly used in North Africa, including cardamom, which I love. If you haven't tried cardamom, in my opinion, can replace cinnamon in some recipes. I have a cardamom ginger spice blend that I use to rub pork chops with, and I'll be making that actually tomorrow night. So if you haven't tried cardamom, I would definitely try it out. But in this spice blend, it is includes cinnamon. So it's cardamom, cinnamon, clove, chili powder, coriander, cumin, pepper, paprika, fenugreek, and turmeric, which is a great combination. And then it says it's really up to the individual cook to assemble according to their preference. So these spices may not be there every time, depending on the person making it. And it says versions of this spice blend can be bought at Middle Eastern groceries, and it is great on meat and fish. So it's something you could rub on meat and fish. So I would love to try that because it's just such a great combination. And then I thought I would just read a little bit more about rose water because I'm kind of a historical nerd. I love historical trivia and facts. So rose water was first made by medieval chemists in Persia by steam distilling rose petals for drinking and perfume. Rose water was a byproduct, which makes sense. And it is used to create a greater depth of flavor in cookies and sweets. Another popular spice is saffron, which contains carotenoids, which are helpful in preventing aging and reducing oxidative stress in the body. So I'm getting older, and that anytime I can get carotenoids, I'm going to try that. It's very popular in the Mediterranean region as well as India, and it is also gives that yellow color. If you've had any kind of rice with saffron, you'll know what I'm talking about. It is more expensive though outside of the Mediterranean region, so if you do buy it, you only need a little bit. And then sea salt, and we've talked about turmeric. And turmeric is great for anti-inflammatory, and is proved to be just as effective as some anti-inflammatory drugs. If you don't have turmeric in your pantry, I would definitely go ahead and buy that. Now, another unique spice to that region, to the Mediterranean region, and I had this in the Middle East. So, and not only did I live in Tunisia, but I have traveled to Jordan and Palestine and Israel, Greece, Turkey, Italy. So I just love that part of the world. And when I was in Jordan, I stayed with a family, and I made a comment that I really love this ingredient called za'atar. It's spelled Z-A''ATAR. And maybe za'atar is maybe the better pronunciation. So the minute I mentioned I really like this, they made whole sandwiches with za'atar in them. And I think it can be made in different ways, but in the cookbook it's a spice blend. And they actually rub it, just like the other spice blends in the cookbook, they rub a roasted duck with it, as well as with garlic, and they have this Za'atar Brick Chicken, which really is very interesting. So let me read a little bit about the blend first. Okay, so as I was saying, this is an Arabic spice blend used all over the Middle East and Africa. The ingredients vary by region, but the focus is always on the oregano and sesame seeds. This can be wonderful on roasted chicken or duck. So it includes oregano, dried mint leaves, sesame seeds, sumac, ground cumin, sea salt, pepper, ground thyme, ground coriander, and ground star anise, which is unique too. So you want to store it in an airtight container in a cupboard away from light. And the quantity is enough to season 6 pounds of meat. So there's the recipe for that, and then you would use that, as I mentioned, on the garlic roast on the duck or that brick chicken, which I was really curious about the name. And so what the reason it's called brick chicken is that you actually cover 2 fire bricks with aluminum foil and put them in the oven for 15 minutes to warm up. And then you actually put the bricks on top of the chicken to weigh it down. So you're putting the chicken in a cast iron skillet, melting the fat over medium-high heat, placing the chicken halves in the pan, skin down, and then you put the bricks on top of them to weigh them down. So that I thought was really interesting. That's not the whole recipe, but I want to try that one too. So the next thing I thought that was unique is called harissa, and that is the North African version of hot sauce, and it's used as a condiment, and a little goes a long way to spice up soups and tajines, which I'll explain what that is in a minute. This is a little bit like a language class today. To make the sauce, use 6 ounces of dried red chili peppers, so that's really what gives it the kick. And then the tomato paste and ground caraway, coriander, cumin, mint leaves, and olive oil is, obviously less spicy. And then there's this harissa dipping sauce, which is a toned down version with honey, and it has more tomato paste, so it's going to be less spicy. So if you're like me, red, chili peppers, it just depends, frankly, if you're a super taster or, you can, really tolerate or enjoy that really, spicy peppers, which I don't. I would need the toned down version. So I said I would talk about Tajine, and that is a very specific clay pot that is unique to the Mediterranean, and that is not something everybody's going to have, so no worries. Of course, there's a swap for that as well, but I thought I would read that to you. North Africa is particularly well known for its flavorful, slow-cooked meat and vegetable dishes made in a clay pot called a tajine. It consists of a large cone-shaped cover on top of a flat base, and the lid circulates the heat back into the food as it cooks. The dishes traditionally made in a tajine are called tajine, and that's spelled Tajines, tajine. But they can be cooked in any type of stock pot or Dutch oven. Making your first tagine can be intimidating, but it is really a fairly simple method. Meat, usually on the bone, is seared with onions and some fat, then broth is added to the pot and heated to a slow simmer. Finally, vegetables are added to the broth when the meat is tender, allowing the flavors to meld together beautifully. So these are often very representative, flavorful combinations of Nabil's childhood cooking and recipes. So I want to try some of the chicken tagine recipes. There is also a lamb and vegetable tagine and a cinnamon braised beef tagine. I have a crock pot, which I think would work well for that. And I want to try the fig and chicken tagine. So that's on my list. Lamb is very popular in North Africa and the Middle East, and there's also a tagine lamb recipe. It's lamb and vegetable tagine, and then he's got tangy lamb stew and lamb kebabs and so on. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of lamb, which even though I lived in a country where there was quite a bit of it, I just never quite took to it. So I was pleased that I could make savory chicken kebabs, and by the way, if you can use fondue forks to layer the chicken and veggies. So I just happen to have those, and those work really well for the kebabs. And then I've also tried the paleo moussaka recipe from this cookbook, which both of the chicken kebabs were delicious. So was the paleo moussaka. If it's a Greek dish primarily, but it is really to die for in this. The recipe is really great. There's also crispy chicken tenders, which I'm not sure I would say that's distinctly Mediterranean, but rather than fry them, which required a lot of coconut oil in a frying pan or skillet, I found that if I added some flax meal to the flour, it was almond flour, that gave it a crunchier texture, and then I just baked the chicken tenders instead of frying them. So they were a little less crispy, but I felt they were crispy and crunchy enough. So that's just a suggestion if you want to try that instead. There are also a lot of good seafood recipes. Seafood, as I mentioned, is not necessarily like salmon and everything we have here, but there's a lot of sardines. I like anchovies, and there is fatty fish as well. So I thought it was interesting that there are recipes for sardine cakes. They're crispy fried sardines. So first of all, you have to like sardines, but if you do, you might want to try some of these out. Now moving on to almonds, which, I love almonds. I eat raw, unsalted almonds all the time. Well, that's very popular in North Africa. And there's a recipe I want to try called almond meatball soup, because I like my soups kind of hearty. I like them to be a real meal. So I'm looking forward to making that. But almonds are also used in desserts quite a bit. And for those of you who've ever had marzipan, you'll know that it's a paste that uses almond or almond flour in it. And so he's got the recipe for it. They call it pâté d'amande. D'amande would be almond. In the cookbook, and that is actually used to then take that paste and stuff like dates with, which says pretty sweet, but that paste is also used for these crescent cookies that look really delicious. And then he's got a recipe for almond tea cookies and almond squares. And then pistachio is another popular ingredient, nut in that part of the world. And I really want to try these pistachio chocolate bites that just look absolutely delicious. So I know me, I tend to actually have a sweet tooth, which is why I hardly ever make desserts. But for a special occasion or for somebody's, birthday or whatever, I would definitely try some of these recipes. So I think that's it for the Mediterranean Paleo Cooking. And if you want to buy the book, I have it on my website in my bookstore, and I'll make the link available in the show notes. Of course, it's on Amazon as well. And I would definitely encourage you to buy it and try some of the recipes out, especially if you're ready for something a little bit new or different. I have already at least 2 or 3 paleo cookbooks, and they're all great, but I was ready for this and wanting to kind of try something else, and I have not been disappointed at all, and really am still using it for new recipes. So also, you can get 10% off on all Casandrinos extra virgin olive oil products by going to their site and entering the coupon code RWP, which stands for Real World Paleo. And it doesn't matter if it's upper or lowercase. So the next episode, I'll be interviewing Dr. Akhil Palanisamy about his new book, The Paleo-Vedic Diet, which combines the paleo diet, Ayurveda, which is the time-tested traditional medical system of India, and the latest scientific research. So I'm really looking forward to interviewing him. And I want to thank everybody for listening today, and have a great, healthy week.